Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Chapter 1, Dudley, demented the hottest day of the summer so far, was drawing to a close, and a drowsy silence lay over the large square houses of privet drive cars that were usually gleaming stood dusty in their drives, and lawns that were once emerald green lay parched, and yellowing. The use of hose pipes had been banned, due to drought deprived of their usual car washing and lawn mowing pursuits. The inhabitants of Privet Drive had retreated into the shade of their cool houses' windows thrown wide in the hope of tempting in a non-existent breeze. The only person left outdoors was a teenage boy who was lying flat on his back in a flower bed outside for he was a skinny, black-haired, bespectacled boy who had the pinched, slightly unhealthy look of someone who has grown a lot in a short space of time. His jeans were torn and dirty, his t-shirt baggy and faded, and the saws of his trainers were peeling away for the uppers. Harry Potter's appearance did not endear him to the neighbors, who were the sort of people who thought scruffiness ought to be punishable by law. But as he had hidden himself behind a large hydrangea bush this evening, he was quite invisible to passers-by. In fact, the only way he would be spotted was if his Uncle Vernon or Aunt Petunia stuck their heads out of the living room window and looked straight down into the flower bed below. On the whole, Harry thought he was to be congratulated on his idea of hiding here. He was not. Perhaps very comfortable lying on the hot, hard earth, but on the other hand, nobody was glaring at him, grinding their teeth so loudly that he could not hear the news, or shooting nasty questions at him, as had happened every time he had tried sitting down in the living room and watching television with his aunt and uncle. Almost as though this thought had fluttered through the open window, Vernon Dursley, Harry's uncle, suddenly spoke, glad to see the boy. "Stop trying to, but in where is he anyway?" "I don't know," said Aunt Petunia, unconcernedly. "Not in the house," Uncle Vernon grunted, watching the news. He said scathingly, "I'd like to know what he's really up to, as if a normal boy cares what's on the news. Dudley hasn't got a clue what's going on. Doubt he knows who the Prime Minister is anyway. It's not as if there'd be anything about his lot on our news." Vernon Shue said. Aunt Petunia, "The windows open." "Oh, yes, sorry, dear." The Dursley fell silent. Harry listened to a jingle about fruit and bran breakfast cereal while he watched Mrs. Figg, a batty, cat-loving old lady from nearby Wisteria Walk, amble slowly past. She was frowning and muttering to herself. Harry was very pleased that he was concealed behind the bush Mrs. Figg had recently taken to asking him around for tea. Whenever she met him in the street, she had rounded the corner and vanished from view before Uncle Vernon's voice floated out of the window again. "Dudder's out for tea at the Pocus," said Aunt Petunia fondly. "He's got so many little friends. He's so popular." Harry repressed a snort with difficulty. The Dlee really were astonishingly stupid about their son Dudley. They had swallowed all his dim-witted lies about having tea with a different member of his gang every night of the summer holidays. Harry knew perfectly well that Dudley had not been to tea anywhere. He and his gang spent every evening vandalizing the play park, smoking on street corners, and throwing stones at passing cars and children. Harry had seen them at it during his evening walks around Little Wing. He had spent most of the holidays wandering the streets, scavenging newspapers from bins along the way. The opening notes of the music that heralded the 7 o'clock news reached Harry's ears, and his stomach turned over. Perhaps tonight, after a month of waiting, would be the night record numbers of stranded holiday makers fill airports. As the Spanish baggage handler strike reaches its second week, give him a lifelong siesta, I would, snarled Uncle Vernon over the end of the newsreader sentence. But no matter outside in the flower bed, Harry's stomach seemed to unclench If anything had happened, it would surely have been the first item on the news. Death and destruction were more important than stranded holiday makers. He let out a long, slow, low breath and stared up at the brilliant blue sky. Every day this summer had been the same, the tension, the expectation, the temporary relief, and then mounting tension again, and always growing more. Insistent all the time, the question of why. Nothing had happened yet. He kept listening just in case there was some small clue not recognized for what it really was by the muggles, an unexplained disappearance perhaps, or some strange accident. But the baggage handler strike was followed by news on the drought in the southeast. "I hope Hune's listening next door," bellowed Uncle Vernon with his sprinklers on at 3 in the morning. Then a helicopter that had almost crashed in a field ensued then. A famous actress's divorce from her famous husband as. "If we're interested in their sordid affairs," sniffed Aunt Petunia, who had followed the case obsessively in every magazine. She could lay her bony hands on Harry, close his eyes against the now blazing evening sky, as the newsreader said, and finally Bungie, the buddy, has found a novel way of keeping cool this summer. Bungie, who lives at the Five Feathers in Barnsley, has learned to water ski Mary Dorkins. Want to find out more? Harry opened his eyes again. If they had reached water skiing budgerigars. There was nothing else worth hearing. He rolled cautiously onto his front and raised himself onto his knees and elbows, preparing to crawl out from under the window. He had moved about 2 in when several things happened in very quick succession. A loud, echoing crack broke the sleepy silence like a gunshot. A cat streaked out from under a parked car and flew out of sight. A shriek, a bellowed oath, and the sound of breaking china came from the Durrell living room. And as though Harry had been waiting for this signal, he jumped to his feet at the same time, pulling from the waistband of his jeans a thin wooden wand, as if he were unsheathing his sword. But before he could draw himself up to full height, the top of his head collided with the dirtily open window, and the resultant crash made Aunt Petunia scream. Even louder, Harry felt as if his head had been split in 2. Eyes streaming, he swayed, trying to focus on the street and spot the source of the noise, but he had barely staggered upright again when 2 large purple hands reached through the open window and closed tightly around his throat. "Put it away, Uncle Vernon," snarled in Harry's ear. "Now, before anyone sees, get off me." Harry G gasped. For a few seconds they struggled, Harry pulling at his uncle's sausage-like fingers with his left hand, his right maintaining a firm grip on his raised wand. Then, as the pain in the top of Harry's head gave a particularly nasty throb, Uncle Vernon yelped and released Harry as though he had received an electric shock. Some invisible force seemed to have surged through his nephew, making him impossible to hold. Panting, Harry fell forward over the hydrangea bush, straightened up, and stared around. There was no sign of what had caused the loud cracking noise, but there were several faces peering through various nearby windows. Harry stuffed his wand hastily back into his jeans and tried to look innocent. "Lovely evening," shouted Uncle Vernon, waving at Mrs. Number 7, who was glaring from behind her net. "Curtains, did you hear that car backfire just now?" gave Petunia and me quite a turn. He continued to grin in a horrible manic way until all the curious neighbors had disappeared from their various windows. Then the grin became a grimace of rage as he beckoned Harry back toward him. Harry moved a few steps closer, taking care to stop just short of the point at which Uncle Vernon's outstretched hands could resume their strangling. "What the devil do you mean by it, boy?" asked Uncle Vernon in a croaky voice that trembled with fury. "What do I mean by what's said?" Harry coldly. He kept looking left and right up the street, still hoping to see the person who had made the cracking noise, making a racket like a starting pistol right outside. I didn't make that noise," said Harry firmly. Aunt Petunia's thin, horsey face now appeared beside Uncle Vernon's wide purple one. She looked livid. "Why were you lurking under our window?" Yes, good point, Petunia. What were you doing under our window, boy? Listening to the news, said Harry in a resigned voice. His aunt and uncle exchanged looks of outrage. Listening to the news again. "Well, it changes every day, you see," said Harry. "Don't you be clever with me, boy. I want to know what you're really up to, and don't give me any more of this listening to the news, TSH. You know perfectly well that you're a lot careful," Vernon breathed to Petunia, and Uncle Vernon lowered his voice so that Harry could barely hear him. "That your lot don't get on our news. That's all you know," said Harry. The Dursley goggled at him for a few seconds. Then a Petunia said, "You're a nasty little liar. What are all those?" She too lowered her voice so that Harry had a lip read the next word. "Owls doing if they're not bringing you news." "Aha," said Uncle Vernon in a triumphant whisper. "Get out of that one, boy. As if we didn't know you get all your news from those pestilential birds." Harry hesitated for a moment. It cost him something to tell the truth this time, even though his aunt and uncle could not possibly know how bad Harry felt at admitting it. "The owls aren't bringing me news," said Harry tonelessly. "I don't believe it," said Aunt Petunia. "At once, no more ado," I said Uncle Vernon forcefully. "We know you're up to something funny," said Aunt Petunia. "We're not stupid, you know," said Uncle Vernon. "Well, that's news to me," said Harry, his temper rising. And before the Dursley could call him back, he had wheeled about, crossed the front lawn, stepped over the low garden wall, and was striding off up the street. He was in trouble now, and he knew it. He would have to face his aunt and uncle later and pay the price for his rudeness. But he did not care very much. Just at the moment, he had much more pressing matters on his mind. Harry was sure that the cracking noise had been made by someone operating or deaerating. It was exactly the sound Dobby the house elf made when he vanished in a thin air. Was it possible that Dobby was here in Privet Drive? Could Dobby be following him right at this very moment? As this thought occurred, he wheeled around and stared back down Privet Drive, but it appeared to be completely deserted again, and Harry was sure that DBBY did not know how to become invisible. He walked on, hardly aware of the route he was taking, for he had pounded these streets so often lately that his feet carried him to his favorite haunts automatically. Every few steps he glanced back over his shoulder. Someone magical had been near him as he lay among Aunt Petunia's dying bonus. He was sure of it. Why hadn't they spoken to him? Why hadn't they made contact? Why were they hiding now? And then, as his feeling of frustration peaked, his certainty leaked away. Perhaps it hadn't been a magical sound after all. Perhaps he was so desperate for the tiniest sign of contact from the world to which he belonged that he was simply overreacting to perfectly ordinary noises. Could he be sure it hadn't been the sound of something breaking inside a neighbor's house? Harry felt a dull, sinking sensation in his stomach, and before he knew it, the feeling of hopelessness that had plagued him all summer rolled over him once again. Tomorrow morning he would be awoken by the alarm at 5 o'clock, so that he could pay the owl that delivered the daily profit. But was there any point in continuing to take it? Harry merely glanced at the front page before throwing it aside. These days, when the idiots who ran the paper finally realized that Voldemort was back, it would be headline news, and that was the only kind Harry cared about. If he was lucky, there would also be owls carrying letters from his best friends Ron and Hermione, though any expectation he had had that their letters would bring him news had long since been dashed. "We can't say much about, you know, what obviously we've been told not to say anything important in case our letters go astray. We're quite busy, but I can't give you details here. There's a fair amount going on. We'll tell you everything when we see you, but when we're going to." See him nobody seemed too bothered with. A precise date Hermione had scribbled, "I expect we'll be seeing you quite soon," inside his birthday card, but how soon was soon as far as Harry could tell from the vague hints in their letters. Hermione and Ron were in the same place, presumably at Ron's parents' house. He could hardly bear to think of the pair of them having fun at the Burrow when he was stuck in Privet Drive. In fact, he was so angry at them that he had thrown both their birthday presents of Honeydukes chocolates away unopened. Though he had regretted this after eating the wilting salad Aunt Petunia had provided for dinner that night. And what were Ron and Hermione busy with? Why wasn't Harry busy? Hadn't he proved himself capable of handling much more than they all forgotten what he had done? Hadn't it been he who had entered that graveyard and watched Cedric being murdered and been tied to that tombstone and nearly killed? Don't think about that, Harry told himself STLY for the 100th time that summer. It was bad enough that he kept revisiting the graveyard in his nightmares without dwelling on it in his waking moments. Too, he turned a corner into Magnolia Crescent. Halfway along, he passed the narrow alleyway down the side of a garage where he had first clapped eyes on his godfather. Sirius at least seemed to understand how Harry was feeling. Admittedly, his letters were just as empty of proper news as Ron and Hermione, but at least they contained words of caution and consolation instead of tantalizing. Hence, I know this must be frustrating for you. Keep your nose clean, and everything will be okay. Be careful, and don't do anything rash. Well, thought Harry as he crossed Magnolia Crescent, turned into Magnolia Road, and headed toward the darkening play park. He had by and large done as Sirius advised. He had at least resisted the temptation to tie his trunk to his broomstick and set off for the Burrow by himself. In fact, Harry thought his behavior had been very good cons, considering how frustrated and angry he felt at being stuck in Privet Drive this long, reduced to hiding in flower beds in the hope of hearing something that might point to what Lord Voldemort was doing. Nevertheless, it was quite galling to be told not to be rash by a man who had served 12 years in the wizard prison Azkaban, attempted to commit the murder he had been convicted for in the first place, then gone on the run with a stolen hippogriff. Harry vaulted over the locked park gate and set off across the parched grass. The park was as empty as the surrounding streets. When he reached the swings, he sank onto the only one that Dudley and his friends had not yet managed to break, coiled one arm around the chain, and stared moodily at the ground. He would not be able to hide in the Dursley flower bed again tomorrow. He would have to think of some fresh way of listening to the news in the meantime. He had nothing to look forward to but another restless, disturbed night, because even when he escaped nightmares about Cedric, he had unsettling dreams about long, dark corridors, all finishing in dead ends and locked doors, which he supposed had something to do with the trapped feeling he had when he was awake. Often the old scar on his forehead prickled uncomfortably, but he did not fool himself that Ron or Hermione or Sirius would find that very interesting anymore. In the past, his scar hurting had warned that Voldemort was getting stronger again. But now that Voldemort was back, they would probably remind him that it's the desk in his dark bedroom. He addressed the first to Sirius, the second to Ron, and the third to Hermione. His owl Hedwig was off hunting her cage, stood empty on the desk. Harry paced the bedroom, waiting for her to come back, his head pounding, his brain too busy for sleep, even though his eyes stung and itched with tiredness, his back ached from carrying Dudley home, and the 2 lumps on his head where the window and Dudley had hit him were throbbing painfully up and down. He paced, consumed with anger and frustration, grinding his teeth and clenching his fists, casting angry looks out at the empty star STWN sky Every time he passed the window, Demeter sent to get him Mrs. Figg and Dungus Fletcher, tailing him in secret, then suspension from Hogwarts, and a hearing at the Ministry of Magic, and still no one was telling him what was going on, and what had that howler been about whose voice had echoed so horribly so. Menacingly through the kitchen, why was he still trapped here without information? Why was everyone treating him like some naughty kid? Don't do any more magic, stay in the house. He kicked his school trunk as he passed it, but far from relieving his anger, he felt worse, as he now had a sharp pain in his toe to deal with in addition to the pain in the rest of his body. Just as he limped past the window, Hedwig soared through it with a soft rustle of wings like a small ghost. About time, Harry snarled as she landed lightly on top of her. "Kid, you can put that down, I've got work for you." Hedwig's large round amber eyes gazed reproachfully at him over the dead frog clamped at her beak. "Come here," said Harry, picking up the 3 small rolls of parchment and a leather thong and tying the scrolls to her scaly leg. "Take these straight to Sirius, Ron, and Hermione, and don't come back here without good long replies. Keep pecking them till they've written decent length answers, if you gotta understand." Hedwig gave a muffled, hooting noise, beak still full of frog. "Get going, then," said Harry. She took off immediately the moment she'd gone. Harry threw himself down onto his bed without undressing and stared at the dark ceiling. In addition to every other miserable feeling, he now felt guilty that he'd been irritable with Hedwig. She was the only friend he had at number 4 Privet Drive, but he'd make it up to her. When she came back with Sirius, Ron's, and Herm's answers, they were bound to write back quickly. They couldn't possibly ignore a Demeter attack. He'd probably wake up tomorrow to 3 fat letters full of sympathy and plans for his immediate removal to the Burrow. And with that comforting idea, sleep rolled over him, stifling all further thought. But Hewig didn't return. Next morning, Harry spent the day in his bedroom, leaving it only to go to the bathroom 3 times. That day, Aunt Petunia shoved food into his room through the cat flap Uncle Vernon had installed 3 summers ago. Every time Harry heard her approaching, he tried to question her about the howler, but he might as well have interrogated the doorknob for all the answers he got. Otherwise, the Durrell kept well clear of his bedroom. Harry couldn't see the point of forcing his company on them. Another row would achieve nothing except perhaps making him so angry he'd perform more illegal magic. So it went on for 3 whole days. Harry was filled alternately with restless energy that made him unable to settle to anything, during which he paced his bedroom, again furious at the whole lot of them for leaving him to stew in this mess, and with a lethargy so complete that he could lie on his bed for an hour at a time, staring dazedly into space, aching with dread at the thought of the ministry hearing. What if they ruled against him? What if he was expelled and his wand was snapped in half? What would he do? Where would he go? He could not return to living full-time with the Durs, not now that he knew the other world, the one to which he really belonged. Was it possible that he might be able to move into Sirius's house, as Sirius had suggested a year ago before he had been forced to flee from the ministry himself? Would he be allowed to live there alone, given that he was still underage? Or would the matter of where he went next be decided for him? Had his breach of the international statute of secrecy been severe enough to land him in a cell in Aspen? Whenever this thought occurred, Harry invariably slid off his bed and began pacing again. On the 4th night after Hedwig's departure, Harry was lying in one of his apathetic phases, staring at the ceiling, his exhausted mind quite blank. When his uncle entered his bedroom, Harry looked slowly around at him. Uncle Vernon was wearing his best suit and an expression of enormous smugness. "We're going out," he said. "Sorry, that is to say, your Aunt Dudley and I are going out." "Fine," said Harry, dully looking back at the ceiling. You are not to leave your bedroom while we are away. Okay, you are not to touch the television, the stereo, or any of our possessions, right? You are not to steal food from the fridge. Okay, I'm going to lock your door. You do that. Uncle Vernon glared at Harry, clearly suspicious of this lack of argument, then stomped out of the room and closed the door behind him. Harry heard the key turn in the lock and Uncle Vernon's footsteps walking heavily down the stairs. A few minutes later, he heard the slamming of car doors, the rumble of an engine, and the unmistakable sound of the car sweeping out. Of the drive, Harry had no particular feeling about the Dursley saying. It made no difference to him whether they were in the house or not. He could not even summon the energy to get up and turn on his bedroom light. The room grew steadily darker around him as he lay listening to the night sounds through the window. He kept open all the time, waiting for the blessed moment when Hedwig returned. The empty house creaked around him. The pipes gurgled. Harry lay there in a kind of stupor, thinking of nothing, suspended in misery, and then quite distinctly he heard a crash in the kitchen below. He sat bolt upright, listening intently. The Dursley couldn't be back. It was much too soon, and in any case he hadn't heard their car. There was silence for a few seconds, and then he heard voices. Burglars, he thought, sliding off the bed on his feet. But a split second later, it occurred to him that burglars would keep their voices down, and whoever was moving around, and it was certainly not troubling to do. So he snatched up his wand from his bedside table and stood facing his bedroom door, listening with all his might. Next moment, he jumped as the lock gave a loud click and his door swung open. Harry stood motionless, staring through the open door at the dark upstairs landing, straining his ears for further sounds, but none came. He hesitated for a moment and then moved swiftly and silently out of his room to the head of the stairs. His heart shot upward into his throat. There were people standing in the shadowy hall below, silhouetted against the street light, glowing through the glass door. 8 or 9 of them, all as far as he could see, looking up at him. "Lower your wand, boy, before you take someone's eye out," said a low, growling voice. Harry's heart was thumping uncontrollably. He knew that voice, but he did not lower his wand. "Professor Moody," he said uncertainly. "I don't know so much about Professor," growled the voice. "Never got round to much teaching did I get down here. We want to see you properly." Harry lowered his wand slightly, but did not relax his grip on it. Nor did he move. He had very good reason to be suspicious. He had recently spent 9 months in what he had thought was Matty Moody's company, only to find out that it wasn't Moody at all, but an imposter moreover, who had tried to kill Harry before being unmasked. But before he could make a decision about what to do next, a second, slightly horror voice floated upstairs. "It's all right, Harry, we've come to take you away." Harry's heart leapt. He knew that voice too, though he hadn't heard it for more than a year. "Professor Lupin," he said disbelievingly. "Is that you? Why are we all standing in the dark?" said a third voice, this one completely unfamiliar, a woman's Lumo, a tip F. Elstead, illuminating the hall with magical light. Harry blinked. The people below were crowded around the foot of the stairs, gazing intently up at him, some craning their heads for a better look. Remus Lupin stood nearest to him, though still quite young. Lupin looked tired and rather ill. He had more gray hair than when Harry had said goodbye to him, and his robes were more patched and shabier than ever. Nevertheless, he was smiling broadly at Harry, who tried to smile back through his shock. "Oh, he looks just like I thought he would," said the witch, who was holding her lit wand aft. She looked the youngest there. She had a pale, heart-shaped face, dark, twinkling eyes, and short, spiky hair that was a violent shade of violet. "Watch her, Harry." "I see what you mean," Remus said, a bald black wizard. Standing farthest back, he had a deep, slow voice, and wore a single gold hoop in his ear. He looks exactly like James, except the eyes, said a wee-voiced, silver-haired wizard at the back. Lily's eyes, Matty Moody, who had long, grizzled gray hair and a large chunk missing from his nose, was squinting suspiciously at Harry. Through his mismatched eyes, one of the eyes was small, dark, and beady, the other large, round. An electric blue, the magical, that could see through walls, doors, and the back of Moody's. "On head, are you quite sure?" "It's him, Lupin," he growled it. "Be a nice lookout if we bring back some Death Eater impersonating him. We ought to ask him something only the real Potter would know, unless anyone brought any Veritas from Harry. What form does your Patronus take?" said Lupin. "A stag," said Harry nervously. "That's him mad." I said Lupin. Harry descended the stairs, very conscious of everybody still staring at him, stowing his wand into the back pocket of his jeans. As he came, "Don't put your wand there." "Boy," roared Moody, "what if it ignited better wizards than you have lost buttocks, you know who?" "You know who's lost a buttock?" the violet-haired woman asked him. "Why?" interestedly. "Never you mind. You just keep your wand out of your back pocket," growled Matty. Elementary wants safety. Nobody bothers about it anymore." He stumped off toward the kitchen, and I saw that he added irritably, as the woman rolled her eyes at the ceiling. Lupin held out his hand and shook Harry's. "How are you?" he asked, looking at Harry closely. Fine, Harry could hardly believe this was real. For weeks, with nothing, not the tiniest hint of a plan to remove him from Privet Drive, and suddenly a whole bunch of wizards was standing matter-of-factly in the house, as though this were a long-standing arrangement. He glanced at the people surrounding Lupin. They were still gazing avidly at him. He felt very conscious of the fact that he had not combed his hair for 4 days. "You're really lucky the Dlee are out," he mumbled. "Lucky, ha," said the violet-haired woman. "It was me that lured them out of the way, sent a letter by Muggle post telling them they'd been shortlisted for the All-England Best-Kept Suburban Lawn competition. They're heading off to the prize giving right now. But they think they are." Harry had a fleeting vision of Uncle Vernon's face when he realized there was no All-England Best-Kept Suburban Lawn competition. "We are leaving, aren't we?" he asked. Soon, almost at once, said Lupin. "We're just waiting for the all-clear." "Where are we going to burrow?" Harry asked. Hopefully not the burrow, no," said Lupin, motioning Harry toward the kitchen. The little knot of wizards followed, all still eyeing Harry curiously. "Too risky. We've set up headquarters somewhere undetectable. It's taken a while." Moody was now sitting at the kitchen table, swigging from a hip flask as magical, spinning in all directions, taking in the mini labor-saving appliances. "This is Oster Moody," Harry Lupin continued, pointing toward Moody. "Yeah, I know," said Harry. Uncomfortably, it felt odd to be introduced to somebody he thought he'd known for a year. "And this is Nidora." "Don't call me Nymphadora Remus," said the young witch with a shudder. "It's Tonks Nymphadora Tonks, who prefers to be known by her surname only," finished Lupin. "So would you if your fool of a mother had called you Nymphadora," muttered Tonks. "And this is Kingsley Shacklebolt." He indicated the tall black wizard, who bowed. "Elf is Doge the wee voiced wizard," nodded Deus Diggle. "We've met before," squeaked the excitable Diggle, dropping his top hat. Emmeline Vance, a stately-looking witch in an emerald-green shawl, inclined her head. Sturgis Podmore, a square-jawed wizard with thick straw-colored hair, winked. "And he's a Jones," a pink-cheeked black-haired witch waved from next to the toaster. Harry inclined his head awkwardly at each of them. As they were introduced, he wished they would look at something other than him. It was as though he had suddenly been ushered on stage. He also wondered why so many of them were there. A surprising number of people volunteered to come and get you, said Lupin, as though he had read Harry's mind. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly. Well, the more the better, said Moody darkly. Rearguard, Potter. We're just waiting for the signal to tell us it's safe to set off, said Lupin, glancing out of the kitchen window. We've got about 15 minutes, very clean. Aren't they, these muggles? Said the witch, called Tonks, who was looking around the kitchen with great interest. My dad's muggle-born, and he's a right old slob. I suppose it varies, just like with wizards. Yeah, said Harry. Look, he turned back to Lupin. What's going on? I haven't heard anything from anyone. What's v? Several of the witches and wizards made odd hissing noises. Deus Diggle dropped his hat again, and Moody growled, shut up. What? Said Harry. We're not discussing anything here. It's too risky, said Moody, turning his normal eye on Harry. Is magical, I remained, pointing up at the ceiling. Damn, he added, angrily, putting a hand up to the magical eye. It keeps sticking ever since that scum wore it. And with a nasty squelching sound, much like a plunger being pulled from a sink, he popped out, as I'm mad. Why, you do know that's disgusting, don't you? Said Tonks conversationally. Give me a glass of water, would you? Harry asked Moody. Harry crossed to the dishwasher, took out a clean glass, and filled it with water at the sink, still watched eagerly by the band of wizards. Their relentless staring was starting to annoy him. Cheers, said Moody when Harry handed him the glass. He dropped the magical eyeball into the water and prodded it up and down. The eye whizzed around, staring at them all in turn. I want 360 degrees visibility on the return journey. How are we getting wherever we're going? Harry asked. Brooms, said Lupin. Only way, you're too young to apparate. They'll be watching the Flu Network, and it's more than our life's worth to set up an unauthorized. Poor Key Remus says you're a good flyer, said Kingsley Shacklebolt in his deep voice. HEK, excellent, said Lupin, who was checking his watch. Anyway, you'd better go and get packed, Harry. We want to be ready to go. When the signal comes, I'll come and help you, said Tonks brightly. She followed Harry back into the hall and up the stairs, looking around with much curiosity and interest. Funny place, she said. It's a bit too clean. Do you know what I mean? Bit unnatural. Oh, this is better, she added as they entered Harry's bedroom, and he turned on the light. His room was certainly much messier than the rest of the house, confined to it for 4 days in a very bad mood. Harry had not bothered tidying up after himself. Most of the books he owned were strewn over the floor, where he tried to distract himself with each in turn, and thrown it aside. Hedwig's cage needed cleaning out and was starting to smell, and his trunk lay open, revealing a jumbled mixture of muggle clothes and wizard's robes that had spilled onto the floor. Around it, Harry started picking up books and throwing them hastily into his trunk. Tonks paused at his open wardrobe to look critically at her reflection in the mirror on the inside of the door. You know, I don't think purple's really my color, she said, pensively tugging at a lock of spiky hair. Do you think it makes me look a bit peaky here? Said Harry, looking up at her over the top of Quidditch teams of Britain and Ireland. Yeah, it does, said Ton decisively. She screwed up her eyes in a strained expression, as though she were struggling to remember something. A second later, her hair had turned bubblegum pink. How did you do that? Said Harry, gaping at her as she opened her eyes again. I'm a metamorphmagus, she said, looking back at her reflection and turning her head so that she could see her hair from all directions. It means I can change my appearance. Well, she added, spotting Harry's puzzled expression in the mirror behind her. I was born one. I got top marks in concealment and disguise during aura training without any study at all. It was great. You're an hour, said Harry, impressed. Being a dark wizard catcher was the only career he'd ever considered after Hogwarts. Yeah, said Tonks, looking proud. Kingsley is as well. He's a bit higher up than I am, though. I only qualified a year ago. Nearly failed on stealth and tracking. I'm dead clumsy. Did you hear me break that plate when we arrived downstairs? Can you learn how to be a metamorphmagus? Harry asked her, straightening up, completely forgetting about packing. Tonks chuckled. Bet you wouldn't mind. Hiding that scar, sometimes her eyes found the lightning-shaped scar on Harry's forehead. No, I wouldn't mind, Harry mumbled, turning away. He did not like people staring at his scar. Well, you'll have to learn the hard way, I'm afraid, said Tonks. Metamorph magi are really rare. They're born, not made. Most wizards need to use a wand or potions to change their appearance. But we've got to get going, Harry. We supposed to be packing, she added, guiltily looking around at all the mess on the floor. Oh yes, said Harry, grabbing up a few more books. Don't be stupid. It'll be much quicker if I pack, cried Tonks, waving her wand in a long sweeping movement over the floor. Books, closed telescope, and scales all soared into the air and flew pell-mell into the trunk. It's not very neat, said Tonks, walking over to the trunk and looking down at the jumble inside. My mom's got this knack of getting stuff to fit itself, and neatly. She even gets the socks to fold themselves, but I've never mastered how she does it. It's a kind. A flick, she flicked her wand. Hopefully one of Harry's socks gave a feeble sort of wiggle and flopped back on top of the mess within. Oh, well, said Tonks, slamming the trunk's lid shut. At least it's all that could do, with a bit of cleaning to scourgify. She pointed her wand at Hedwig's cage. A few feathers and droppings vanished. Well, that's a bit better. I've never quite got the hang of these sort of household spells, right? Got everything called in broom. Wow. Firebolt, her eyes widened as they fell on the broomstick in Harry's right hand. It was his pride and joy, a gift from Sirius, an international standard broomstick. And I'm still riding a Comet 260, said Tonks enviously. Ah, well, one's still in your jeans, both buttocks still on. Okay, let's go. Locomo trunk. Harry's trunk rose a few inches into the air, holding her wand like a conductor's baton. Tonks made it hover across the room and out of the door ahead of them. Hedwig's cage in her left hand. Harry followed her down the stairs, carrying his broomstick. Back in the kitchen, Moody had replaced his eye, which was spinning so fast after its cleaning it made Harry feel sick. Kingsley Shacklebolt and Sturgis Podmore were examining the microwave, and Heza Jones was laughing at a potato peeler she had come across while rummaging in the drawers. Lupin was sealing a letter addressed to the Dursley Excellent, said Lupin, looking up as Tun and Harry entered. We've got about a minute. I think we should probably get out into the garden so we're ready. Harry, I've left a letter telling your aunt and uncle not to worry. They won't, said Harry, that you're safe. That'll just depress them, and you'll see them next summer. Do I have to? Lupin smiled, but made no answer. Come here, boy, said Moody gruffly, beckoning Harry toward him with his wand. I need to disillusion. You need to what? Said Harry nervously. Disillusionment charm, said Moody, raising his wand. Lupin says you've got an invisibility cloak, but it won't stay on while we're flying. This will disguise. You better. Here you go. He rapped Harry hard on the top of the head, and Harry felt a curious sensation, as though Moody had just smashed an egg there. Cold trickles seemed to be running down his body from the point the wand had struck. Nice. 1 said Tonks, appreciatively staring at Harry's midriff. Harry looked down at his body, or rather what had been his body, for it didn't look anything like his anymore. It was not invisible. It had simply taken on the exact color and texture of the kitchen unit. Behind him, he seemed to have become a human chameleon. Come on, said Moody, unlocking the back door with his wand. They all stepped outside onto Uncle Vernon's beautifully kept lawn. Clear night, grunted Moody, his magical EY, scanning the heavens. Could have done with a bit more cloud cover, right, you? He barked at Harry. We're going to be flying in close formation. Tonks will be right in front of you. Keep close on her tail. Lupin will be covering you from below. I'm going to be behind you. The rest will be circling us. We don't break ranks for anything. Got me if one of us is killed. Is that likely? Harry asked apprehensively. But Moody ignored him. The others keep flying. Don't stop. Don't break ranks if they take out all of us. and you survive Harry the rearguard, are standing by to take over, keep flying east, and they'll join you. Stop being so cheerful, Matt. He'll think we're not taking this seriously, said Tonks, as she strapped Harry's trunk in Hedwig's cage into a harness hanging from her broom arm. Just telling the boy the plan, growled Moody. Our job's to deliver him safely to headquarters. And if we die in the attempt, no one's going to die, said Kingsley Shacklebolt in his deep, calming voice. Mount your brooms. That's the first signal, said Lupin sharply, pointing into the sky. Far, far above them, a shower of bright red sparks had flared among the stars. Harry recognized them at once as Onion sparks. He swung his right leg over his firebolt, gripped its handle tightly, and felt it vibrating very slightly, as though it was as keen as he was to be up in the air. Once more, second signal, Leighton. Go, said Lupin loudly, as more sparks, green this time, exploded high above them. Harry kicked off hard from the ground. The cool night air rushed through his hair as the neat square gardens of Privet Drive fell away, shrinking rapidly into a patchwork of dark greens and blacks, and every thought of the ministry hearing was swept from his mind as though the rush of air had blown it out of his head. He felt as though his heart was going to explode with pleasure. He was flying again, flying away from Privet Drive as he'd been fantasizing about all summer. He was going home for a few glorious moments. All his problems seemed to recede into nothing insignificant in the vast starry sky. Hard left, hard left. There's a muggle looking up, shouted Moody from behind him. Tonks swerved, and Harry followed her, watching his trunk swinging wildly beneath her broom. We need more height. Give it another quarter of a mile. Harry's eyes watered in the chill as they soared upward. He could see nothing below now but tiny pinpricks of light that were car headlights and street lamps. Two of those tiny lights might belong to Uncle Vernon's car. The Durrell will be heading back to their empty house, right now full of rage about the non-existent lawn competition, and Harry laughed aloud at the thought, though his voice was drowned by the flapping of the others' robes, the creaking of the harness holding his trunk in the cage, the whoosh of the wind in their ears as they sped through the air. He had not felt this alive in a month, or this happy bearing south, shouted Maddie. A town ahead. They soared right, so that they did not pass directly over the glittering spiderweb of lights below. Bear southeast, and keep climbing. There's some low cloud ahead. We can lose ourselves, and called Moody. We not going through clouds, shouted Tonks, angrily. Wet gets soaked him. Harry was relieved to hear her say this. His hands were growing numb on the firebolt's handle. He wished he had thought to put on a coat. He was starting to shiver. They altered their course every now and then according to Medi instructions. Harry's eyes were screwed up against the rush of icy wind that was starting to make his ears ache. He could remember being this cold on a broom only once before, during the Quidditch match against Hufflepuff in his third year, which had taken place in a storm. The guard around him was circling continuously like giant birds of prey. Harry lost track of time. He wondered how long they had been flying. It felt like an hour, at least. Turning southwest, yelled Moody, "We want to avoid the motorway." Harry was now so chilled that he thought longingly for a moment of the snug, dry interiors of the cars streaming along below, then even more longingly of traveling by Floo powder. Might be uncomfortable to spin around in fireplaces, but it was at least warm in the flames. Kingsley Shacklebolt swooped around him, bald pate and earring gleaming slightly in the moonlight. Now Emmeline Vance was on his right, her wand out, her head turning left and right. Then she too swooped over him, to be replaced by Sturgis Podmore. "We ought to double back for a bit, just to make sure we're not being followed," Moody shouted. "Are you mad?" Tons screamed from the front. "We're all frozen to our brooms." If we keep going off course, we're not going to get there until next week. We're nearly there now. Time to start the descent came. Lupin's voice followed Harry. Harry followed Tonks into a dive. They were heading for the largest collection of lights he had yet seen, a huge, sprawling, crisscrossing mass, glittering in lines and grids interspersed with patches of deepest black. Lower and lower they flew until Harry could see individual headlights and street lamps, chimneys, and television aerials. He wanted to reach the ground very much, though. He felt sure that someone would have to unfreeze him from his broom here. Wigo called Tonks, and a few seconds later, she had landed. Harry touched down right behind her and dismounted on a patch of unkempt grass in the middle of the small square. Tonks was already unbuckling Harry's trunk. Shivering Harry looked around. The grimy fronts of the surrounding houses were not welcoming. Some of them had broken windows glimmering dully in the light from the street lamps. Paint was peeling from many of the doors, and heaps of rubbish lay outside several sets of front steps. "Where are we?" Harry asked, but Lupin said quietly in A. Minute Moody was rummaging in his cloak, his gnarled hands clumsy with cold. "Got it," he muttered, raising what looked like a silver cigarette lighter into the air and clicking at the nearest street lamp. Went out with a pop. He clicked the unlight again. The next lamp went out. He kept clicking until every lamp in the square was extinguished, and the only light in the square came from curtained windows and the sickle moon overhead borrowed it from. "Dumbledore," growled Moody, pocketing the put outer. "That'll take care of any muggles looking out of the window. Seen now. Come on, quick." He took Harry by the arm and led him from the patch of grass across the road and onto the pavement. Lupin and Tonks followed, carrying Harry's trunk. Between them, the rest of the guard, all with their wands out, flanking them. The muffled pounding of stereo was coming from an upper window in the nearest house. A pungent smell of rotting rubbish came from the pile of bulging bin bags just inside the broken gate. "Here," Moody muttered, thrusting a piece of parchment toward Harry's disillusioned hand and holding his lit wand close to it so as to illuminate the writing. "Read quickly and memorize." Harry looked down at the piece of paper. The narrow handwriting was vaguely familiar. It said, "The headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix may be found at number 12 Grimel Place, London, chapter 4, number 12 Grimel Place." "What's the order of the?" Harry began. "Not here, boy," snarled Moody. "Wait till we're inside." He pulled the piece of parchment out of Harry's hand and set fire to it with his wand tip as the message curled into flames and floated to the ground. Harry looked around the houses again. They were standing outside number 11. He looked to the left and saw number 10 to the right, however, was number 13. "But where's think about what you've just memorized," said Lupin quietly. Harry thought. And no sooner had he reached the part about number 12 Grimel Place than a battered door emerged out of nowhere between numbers 11 and 13, followed swiftly by dirty walls and grimy windows. It was as though an extra house had inflated, pushing those on either side out of its way. Harry gaped at the stereo. In number 11 fed on apparently the muggles inside. "Had even felt anything come on." "Hurry," growled Moody, prodding Harry in the back. Harry walked up the worn stone steps, staring at the newly materialized door. This black paint was shabby and scratched. The silver door knocker was in the form of a twisted serpent. There was no keyhole or letterbox. Lupin pulled out his wand and tapped the door. Once Harry heard many loud metallic clicks and what sounded like the clatter of a chain. The door creaked open, getting quick. Harry, Lupin whispered, "But don't go far inside, and don't touch anything." Harry stepped over the threshold into the almost total darkness of the hall. He could smell damp dust and a sweetish rotting smell. The place had the feeling of a derelict building. He looked over his shoulder and saw the others filing in behind. Lin and Tonks carrying his trunk, and Hedwig's cage Moody was standing on the top step and releasing the balls of light that Put Toe had stolen from the street lamps. They flew back to their bulbs, and the square beyond glowed momentarily with orange light before Moody limped inside and closed the front door so that the darkness in the hall became complete here. He rapped Harry hard over the head with his wand. Harry felt as though something hot was trickling down his back this time, and knew that the disillusionment charm must have lifted now. "Stay still, everyone, while I give us a bit of light in here," Moody whispered. The others' hushed voices were giving Harry an odd feeling of foreboding. It was as though they had just entered the house of a dying person. He heard a soft hissing noise, and then old-fashioned gas lamps sputtered into life all along the walls, casting a flickering, insubstantial light over the peeling wallpaper and threadbare carpet of a long, gloomy hallway where a cobwebby chandelier glimmered overhead, and age-blackened portraits hung crooked on the walls. Harry heard something scuttling behind the baseboard. Both the chandelier and the candelabra on a kiddie table nearby were shaped like serpents. There were hurried footsteps, and Ron's mother, Mrs. Weasley, emerged from a door at the far end of the hall. She was beaming in welcome as she hurried toward them, though Harry noticed that she was rather thinner and paler than she had been last time he had seen her. "Oh, Harry, it's lovely to see you," she whispered, pulling him into a rib-cracking hug before holding him at arm's length and examining him critically. "You're looking peaky. You need Faye feeding up, but you'll have to wait a bit for dinner, I'm afraid." She turned to the gang of wizards behind him and whispered urgently, "He's just arrived. The meeting started." The wizards behind Harry all made noises of interest and excitement and began filing past Harry toward the door through which Mrs. Weasley had just come. Harry made to follow Lupin, but Mrs. Weasley held him back. "No, Harry, the meeting's only for members of the Order. Ron and Herm are upstairs. You can wait with them until the meeting's over, and then we'll have dinner. And keep your voice down in the hall," she added in an urgent whisper. "Why, I don't want to wake anything up. What? Gee, I'll explain later. I gotta hurry. I'm supposed to be at the meeting. I'll just show you where you're sleeping," pressing her finger to her lips. She led him on tiptoes past a pair of long moth-eaten curtains behind which Harry supposed there must be another door, and after skirting a large umbrella stand that looked as though it had been made from a severed troll's leg, they started up the dark staircase, passing a row of shrunken heads mounted on plaques on the wall. A closer look showed Harry that the heads belonged to house elves. All of them had the same rather snout-likey nose. Harry's bewilderment deepened with every step he took. What on earth were they doing in a house that looked as though it belonged to the darkest of wizards? Mrs. Weasley, "Why, Ron and Hermione will explain everything, dear. I've really got to dash," Mrs. Weasley whispered distractedly. They had reached the second landing near the door on the right. "I'll call you when it's over," and she hurried off downstairs again. Harry crossed the dingy landing, turned the bedroom doorknob, which was shaped like a serpent head, and opened the door. He caught a brief glimpse of a gloomy, high-ceilinged, twin-bedded room. Then there was a loud, twittering noise, followed by an even louder shriek, and his vision was completely obscured by a large quantity of very bushy hair. Herm had thrown herself onto him in a hug that nearly knocked him flat, while Ron's tiny owl pigeon zoomed excitedly round and round their heads. "Harry, Ron, he's here. Harry's here. We didn't hear you arrive. Oh, how are you? Are you all right? Have you been furious with us? I bet you have, I know. Our letters were useless, but we couldn't tell you anything. Dumbledore made us swear we wouldn't know. We've got so much to tell you, and you got to tell us the Dementors when we heard, And that ministry hearing, it's just outrageous. I've looked it all up. They can't expel you. They just can't. There's provision in the decree for the restriction of underage sorcery for the use of magic in life-threatening situations. Let him breathe, Hermione, said Ron, grinning, closing the door behind Harry. He seemed to have grown several more inches during their month apart, making him taller and more gangly looking than ever, though the long nose, bright red hair, and freckles were the same. Hermione, still beaming, let go of Harry. But before she could say another word, there was a soft whooshing sound, and something white soared from the top of a dark wardrobe and landed gently on Harry's shoulder. Hedwig the snowy owl clicked her beak and nibbled his ear affectionately as Harry stroked her feathers. She's been in a right state, said Ron. Pecked us have to. Death, when she brought your last letters. Look at this. He showed Harry the index finger of his right hand, which sported a half-healed but clearly deep cut. Well, yeah, Harry said, sorry about that. But I wanted answers, you know, we wanted to give them to you. Mate said Ron. Hermione was going spare. She kept saying you'd do something stupid if you were stuck all on your own without news. But Dumbledore made us swear not to tell me, said Harry. Yeah, Hermione already said. The warm glow that had flared inside him at the sight of his two best friends was extinguished as something icy flooded the pit of his stomach all of a sudden. After yearning to see them for a solid month, he felt he would rather Ron and Hermione left him alone. There was a strained silence in which Harry stroked Hedwig automatically, not looking at either of the others. He seemed to think it was best, said Hermione, rather breathlessly. Dumbledore. I mean, right, said Harry. He noticed that her hands too bore the marks of Hedwig's beak and found that he was not at all sorry. I think he thought you were safest with the Muggles, Ron began. Yeah, said Harry, raising his eyebrows. Have either of you been attacked by Dementors this summer? Well, no. But that's why he's had people from the Order of the Phoenix tailing you all the time. Harry felt a great jolt in his guts, as though he had just missed a step going downstairs. So everyone had known he was being followed. Except him. Didn't work that well, though, did it? Said Harry, doing his utmost to keep his voice even. Had to look after myself, after all, didn't I? He was so angry, said Hermione in an almost a struck voice. Dumbledore, we saw him when he found out Mundungus had left before his shift had ended. He was scary. Well, I'm glad he left, Harry said coldly. If he hadn't, I wouldn't have done magic, and Dumbledore would probably have left me at Privet Drive all summer. Aren't you worried about the Ministry of Magic hearing? Said Hermione quietly. No, Harry lied. Defiantly, he walked away from them, looking around with Hedwig nestled contentedly on his shoulder. But this room was not likely to raise his spirits. It was dank and dark. A blank stretch of canvas and an ornate picture frame was all that relieved the barness of the peeling walls, and as Harry passed it, he thought he heard someone lurking out of sight snigger. So, why Dumbledore be so keen to keep me in the dark? Harry asked, still trying hard to keep his voice casual. Did you bother to ask him at all? He glanced up just in time to see them exchanging a look that told him he was behaving just as they had feared. He would have did nothing to improve his temper. We told Dumbledore we wanted to tell you what was going on, said Ron. We did, mate. But he's really busy now. We've only seen him twice since we came here, and he didn't have much time. He just made us swear not to tell you important stuff. When we wrote, he said the owls might be intercepted. He could still be kept me informed if he'd wanted to. Harry said shortly, you're not telling me he doesn't know ways to send messages without owls? Hermione glanced at Ron and then said, I thought that too, but he didn't want you to know anything. Maybe he thinks I can't be trusted, said Harry, watching their expressions. Don't be thick, said Ron, looking highly disconcerted. Or that I can't take care of myself, of course. He doesn't think that, said Hermione anxiously. So how come I have to stay at the Durrell while you two get to join in everything that's going on here? said Harry, the words tumbling over one another in a rush, his voice growing louder with every word. How come you two are allowed to know everything that's going on? We're not, Ron interrupted Mom. Won't let us near the meetings. She says we're too young. But before he knew it, Harry was shouting. So you haven't been in the meetings? Big deal, you've still been here, haven't you? You've still been together, me. I've been stuck at the dolly for a month, and I've handled more than you Tove ever managed, and Dumbledore knows it. Who saved the sorcerer stone? Who got rid of Riddle? Who saved both your skins from the Dementors? Every bitter and resentful thought that Harry had had in the past month was pouring out of him, his frustration at the lack of news, the hurt that they had all been together without him, his fury at being followed and not told about it, all the feelings he was half ashamed have finally burst their boundaries. Hedwig took fright at the noise and soared off on top of the wardrobe again. Pigeon twittered in alarm and zoomed even faster around their heads, who had to get past dragons and sphinxes and every other foul thing last year, who saw him come back, who had to escape from him. Ron was standing there with his mouth half open, clearly stunned and at a loss for anything to say, while Hermione looked on the verge of tears. But why should I know what's going on? Why should anyone bother to tell me what's been happening? Harry, we wanted to tell you. We really did. Hermione began. Can't. V wanted it that much. Can you, or you'd have sent me an owl? But Dumbledore made you swear. Well, he did for weeks. I've been stuck in Privet Drive nicking papers out. I've been to try and find out what's been going on. We wanted to, I suppose you've been having a real laugh. Haven't you all holed up here together? No, honest, Harry, we're really sorry, said Hermione desperately, her eyes now sparkling with tears. You're absolutely right, Harry. I'd be furious if it was me. Harry glared at her, still breathing deeply, then turned away from them again. Pacing up and down, Hewig hooted glumly from the top of the wardrobe. There was a long pause, broken only by the mournful creak of the floorboards below Harry's feet. What is this place, anyway? He shot at Ron. And Hermione, headquarters of the Order of the Phoenix, said Ron. At once, is anyone going to bother telling me what the Order of the Phoenix? It's a secret society, said Hermione quickly. Dumbledore in charge. He founded it. It's the people who fought against you know who last time. Who's in it, said Harry, coming to a halt with his hands in his pockets. Quite a few people we've met, about 20 of them, said Ron. But we think there are more. Harry glared at them. Well, he demanded, looking from one to the other, said Ron. Well, what Voldemort, said Harry furiously, and both Ron and Herm winced. What's happening? What's he up to? Where is he? What are we doing to stop him? We've told you the Order don't let us in on their meetings, said Herm nervously. So, we don't know the details, but we've got a general idea, she added hastily, seeing the look on Harry's face. Fred and George have invented extendable ears. See, said Ron, they're really useful extendable ears. We've had to stop using them lately, because Mom found out and went berserk. Fred and George had to hide them all to stop Mom bending them. But we got a good bit of use out of them before Mom realized what was going on. We know some of the Order are following known Death Eaters, keeping tabs on them. Some of them are working on recruiting more people to the Order, said Hermione, and some of them are standing guard over something, said Ron. They're always talking about guard duty. Couldn't have been me, could it? Said Harry sarcastically. Oh, yeah, said Ron with a look of dawning comprehension. Harry snorted. He walked around the room again, looking anywhere but at Ron and Hermione. So what have you two been doing if you're not allowed in meetings? He demanded. You said you've been busy. We have, said Hermione quickly. We've been decontaminating this house. It's been empty for ages and stuff's been breeding in here. We've managed to clean out the kitchen, most of the bedrooms, and I think we're doing the drawing room. Tomo, ARG, with two loud cracks. Fred and George, Ron's elder twin brothers, had materialized out of thin air in the middle of the room, Pigeon twittered more wildly than ever and zoomed off to join Hedwig on top of the wardrobe stop, doing that Hermione said. Weakly to the twins, who were as vividly red-haired as Ron. Though stockier and slightly shorter, hello, Harry, said George, beaming at him. We thought we heard your dullet tones. You don't want to bottle up your anger like that, Harry. Let it all out, said Fred. Also beaming, there might be a couple of people 50 m away who didn't hear you two pass your apparition test. Then asked Harry grumpily. With distinction, said Fred, who was holding what looked like a piece of very long flesh-colored string. It would have taken you about 30 seconds longer to walk down the stairs, said Ron. Time is Galleon's little brother, said Fred. Anyway, Harry, you're interfering with reception extendable ears, he added in response to Harry's raised eyebrows, holding up the string which Harry now saw was trailing out onto the landing. We try and hear what's going on downstairs. You want to be careful, said Ron, staring at the ear. If Mom sees one of them again, it's worth the risk that a major meeting they're having, said Fred. The door opened, and a long mane of red hair appeared. Oh, hello, Harry, said Ron's younger sister, Jenny, brightly. I thought I heard your voice, turning to Fred and George. She said it's no go with the extendable ear. She's gone and put an imperturbable charm on the kitchen door. How do you know, said George, looking crestfallen. Ton told me how to find out, said Jenny. You just chuck stuff at the door, and if it can't make contact, the door's been imperturbable ears will be able to get under the gap. Fred heaved a deep sigh. Shame, I really fancied finding out what Old Snap's been up to. Snape, said Harry quickly. Is he here? Yes, said George, carefully closing the door and sitting down on one of the beds. Fred and Jenny followed, giving a report top secret. Get, said Fred, idly. Hume's on our side now, said Hermione reprovingly. Ron snorted. Doesn't stop him being a get the way he looks at us when he sees us. Bill doesn't like him either, said Jenny, as though that settled the matter. Harry was not sure his anger had abated yet, but his thirst for information was now overcoming his urge to keep shouting. He sank onto the bed opposite the others. Is Bill here? He asked. I thought he was working in Egypt. He applied for a desk job so he could come home and work for the order, said Fred. He says he misses the tombs, but he smirked. There are compensations. What you mean? Remember old Fleur Deller, said George. She's got a job at Gratz to improve her English, and Bill's been giving her a lot of private lessons, sniggered Fred. Charlie's in the order too, said George, but he's still in Romania. Dumbledore wants as many foreign wizards brought in as possible, so Charlie's trying to make contacts on his days off. Couldn't Percy do that? Harry asked the last. He had heard the third Weasley brother was working in the Department of Interational Magical Cooperation at the Ministry of Magic. At these words, all the Weasley and Hermione exchanged darkly significant looks. Whatever you do, don't mention Percy in front of Mom and Dad, Ron told Harry in a tense voice. Why not? Because every time Percy's name's mentioned, Dad breaks whatever he's holding and Mom start crying. Fred said it's been awful, said Jenny sadly. I think we're well shut of him, said George with an unartistically ugly look on his face. What's happened, Harry? Said Percy. And Dad had a row, said Fred. I've never seen Dad row with anyone like that. It's normally Mom who shouts. It was the first week back after term ended, said Ron. We were about to come and join the order. Percy came home and told us he'd been promoted. You're kidding, said Harry, though he knew perfectly well that Percy was highly ambitious. Harry's impression was that Percy had not made a great success of his first job at the Ministry of Magic. Percy had committed the fairly large oversight of failing to notice that his boss was being controlled by Lord Voldemort, not that the Ministry had believed that they all thought that Mr. Crouch had gone mad. Yeah, we were all surprised, said George, because Percy got into a load of trouble about Crouch. There was an inquiry and everything. They said Percy ought to have realized Crouch was off his rocker and informed his superior. But Percy Crouch left him in charge. He wasn't going to complain. So how come they promoted him? That's exactly what we wondered, said Ron, who seemed very keen to keep normal conversation going now that Harry had stopped yelling. He came home really pleased with himself, even more pleased than usual, if you can imagine that, and told Dad he'd been offered a position in Fudge's. On office, a really good one for someone only a year out of Hogwarts, junior assistant to the minister. He expected Dad to be all impressed. I think only Dad wasn't, said Fred grimly. Why not, said Harry. Well, apparently Fudge has been storming round the ministry checking that nobody's having any contact with Dumbledore, said. George Dumbledore's name's Mud with the ministry these days. See, said Fred, they all think he's just making trouble saying you. Know who's back, Dad, says Fudge has made it clear that. Anyone who's in league with Dumbledore can clear out their desk, said George. Trouble is Fudge suspects, Dad. He knows he's friendly with Dumbledore, and he's always thought Dad's a bit of a weirdo because of his muggle obsession. But what's this got to do with Percy, asked Harry, confused. I'm coming to that. Dad reckons Fudge only wants Percy in his office because he wants to use him as spy on the family, and Dumbledore, Harry let out a low whistle bet. Percy loved that Ron laughed in a hollow sort of way. He went completely berserk. He said loads of terrible stuff. He said he's been having a struggle against Dad's lousy reputation ever since he joined the ministry, and that Dad's got no ambition. And that's why we've always been, not had a lot of money. I mean, what, said Harry in disbelief, as Ginny made a noise like an angry cat. I know, said Ron in a low voice, and it got worse. He said Dad was an idiot to run around with. Dumbledore